Hello, boys and girls. This is Anup Marwadi from Hypertrends Global Inc. Today, we are going to talk about the Ocelot open source .NET Core API Gateway. If you have to do anything with microservices, I highly advise you to look at Ocelot as it is a great open source solution for building API gateways. Don't know what an API gateway is? Stick around. You're going to find out. Okay, let's say you're designing an e-commerce application and you want to build that using REST APIs. Now, the application itself could be built with a bunch of different microservices. You could have your order services, you could have your catalog services containing all the product information, you could have a reference data service containing currencies, geographies, you could have inventory service, you could have a review service for your customers, you could have user management service, and if you're building a multi-tenant application, you could also have a tenant API service. So obviously, if you go ahead and open these up as individual services, that's just going to confuse your consumers. So at that point, you build what is called an API gateway that completely unifies all of these services and provides a common access to each of these services. And that's where the API Gateway Ocelot comes in play. Okay, so to get this going, we're going to build two different APIs. One is going to be a catalog API that will be hosted on port 7001, and one is going to be an orders API that will be on port 702. And then the final gateway API that we create will be on port 7000. And the way I want to do this is the catalog API obviously can be accessed on its own. The orders can too, but then the gateway API offers a unified access. So in order to do this, we need to build a solution structure. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to make a folder called API Gateway Example. And underneath this folder, I'm going to make separate projects. So we're going to make a catalog API and then an orders API. And then we're also going to make a gateway API. So we'll build this folder structure next. Great. So now that we have that idea here, let's go ahead and build the folder structure. So let's navigate to any folder directory that you want, and let's go ahead and create a directory called API Gateway Example. And then in here, let's build the catalog API and also an orders API and also a gateway API. All right, so if you navigate to your Finder, you can see API Gateway Example, you'll see a catalog API, gateway API, and orders API. This is great. Now let's go ahead and build a new solution for our API gateway here. So I'm just going to do a .NET new, and I'm going to build what is called as an SLN for solution. And if I click OK, it's going to go ahead and create the API Gateway Example solution. Now at this point, I think let's open up Visual Studio Code and just make sure that everything's going good. If you don't already have a Solution Explorer plugin, I think you should go ahead and install that. Visual Studio will prompt you. There's a VS Code Solution Explorer plugin that I would like to turn on here. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn that on. And you'll see it drops in some files here, just so you know. But the great thing now is you can see a solution here, and then you'll be able to add new projects or existing projects here. I like to keep my projects created using the command prompt, but you can go ahead and use the Solution Explorer. Let's make API projects for the catalog API as well as the orders API next. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and build the catalog API to begin with. So let's go into the catalog API folder. and then you can see it's empty right now. Let's go ahead and do .NET new, and then we'll do a web API. This will go ahead and create a new web API project in the catalog API folder. So if you go back to your Finder now, you're going to see the catalog API, and you also see that in here. A great thing now you can do is you can go to your Solution Explorer and right-click on it and add an existing project. And all you need to do is navigate to the folder and then pick the project that you want to add. One more thing that we need to do is make sure that this runs off of port 7001 as we had originally planned. So I'm going to remove this HTTPS for the time being and just going to focus on putting this on 7001. And let's go ahead and add the Orders API now. So I'm going to go up one level and then go into Orders API. And then again, we're going to do a .NET new web API. This should add the Orders API project in here. And then let's come back here, confirm that it is indeed added. And then let's go and add that to the Solution Explorer. Same approach, we'll just go up one level here, pick our Orders API, and then pick that. And then another thing that we need to do is make sure that this guy also runs off of port 7002. All right, so we've created the two API projects here. Okay, so now that we have our catalog API created as well as our orders API, let's just make sure that we have something meaningful coming out of our controller. So let's go to this values controller and rename this guy, and let's just call it, let's say currencies controller. This controller is going to give us all the different currencies that are available in our system. So I'm just going to create a few things here. So I'm going to create this controller with the name of currencies. The action name API currencies is just going to get us a bunch of available currencies. I'm just going to go ahead and delete all of these because we don't really need those. Okay, and then I'm going to just go ahead and create a few currencies here called USD, INR for Indian rupees, and then I'm going to do JPY. Let's just keep this very simple now. I could go ahead and create a currency object and then give you all of this information, but that would defeat the purpose of actually showing you the Ocelot gateway. So let's keep this very simple. This is the currencies call. Let's just go into the catalog API and do a .NET build. Make sure that all of that is running as expected. And it is compiling. So you'll see that there's something going on here. I'm missing something in here. I think I should do a .NET restore. Oops, my bad. This should have been called out. There you go. That should work just fine now. Okay, so we have that running. Now let's do a .NET run. Hopefully that opens up on 7001, and then we are able to navigate to API currencies to see the different currencies. So let's just go there and do API/currencies, and then you can see the three currencies that we created. Perfect. All right, just like the catalog API, I went ahead and created an orders controller inside of the orders API. And you can see that I made it HTTP GET with an empty route that will amount to order/API/orders. And then I created an orders class in here for a change. And I added an ID and an amount and created a constructor. And then I'm essentially adding an O1 order with ID 1 of $200 and O2 order with ID 2 of $400. And I'm returning that. Very simple. Let's go ahead and do a .NET run. Hopefully this runs on 7002, and then we are able to navigate to see our order information. So let's command click this guy, and then we're going to do API/orders. So as you can see, the order objects are getting returned back. Okay, so far we have built a catalog API controller called currencies, and that gives me my currencies, and I've also created one for the orders that gives me order information. These are two different microservices. One runs on 7001, one runs on 7002. Now we want to create an API gateway that's going to unify these. So if you were to go back to the project structure, you'll see that we have API gateway example as the parent folder, in that we had a solution and then 3 folders. We never did anything with the gateway API. So let's go ahead and create that. So I'm just going to go up one level here and get into the gateway API folder. And you can see it's empty, and I'm just going to do a .NET new web API. Now, it's best to create this as a web API, but honestly, we're not going to use the controllers in here, at least to begin with. I'm just going to go into the gateway API here, and I'm going to go ahead and delete this controller. It literally serves no purpose. And I'm also going to go in here, and I'm going to add an existing project, and then let's just go up one level here, get into our gateway API, and add this project in here as well. So that is going to be the gateway API that's going to unify the other two. So as decided, we're going to run this off of port 7000. So let's go ahead and keep that in here. And then the launch URL doesn't really even matter at this point. So with that, you're pretty much established the foundation. You've pretty much established the foundation for putting Ocelot in. So there are two things that need to happen when you want to install Ocelot. One is you need to add the NuGet package, and then the second is that you're going to configure Ocelot within the API. How we do that, we're going to talk about right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and add the NuGet package for Ocelot. Control C here, I'm going to clear this, and I'm just going to do Command Shift P, and then we can do a NuGet, and then Package Manager, add package. So when you do that, it's going to ask you for the name of the package you want to install. Let's do Ocelot. It's going to look it up and find it here. Once you pick that, it's going to give you a little bit of information here on what you need to pick. I'm just going to pick the latest stable here. Looks like 11.02 is the most stable version. And then where would I like to install that? Obviously, that needs to go under your Gateway API project. So I'm going to pick that guy, and it says it's successfully added there. To confirm, let's go back into our CS proj, and here we see the Ocelot package reference. Let's go in there and restore our packages. So I'm just going to do a .NET restore, and that should go ahead and restore the Ocelot packages. I'm going to do a .NET build, make sure everything's still functional, and it looks like everything seems to be working fine. So the next thing that we need to do is configure Ocelot and then add the Ocelot configuration in the two files, the program and the startup file. So let me just go ahead and add a file called ocelot.json. This is the file that is going to tell Ocelot how it needs to behave and redirect the various incoming requests to the various microservices. So that's the ocelot.json file. And then I also need to plug in the Ocelot middleware in our application. So I've created this ocelot.json, but how do I tell the application that you need to be looking for that file? Well, you navigate into the program.cs here, and you'll notice that this guy is essentially building an iWebhost builder and then building and running it. So this is a good place where you could go ahead and tell it, hey, by the way, you need to do a configure app configuration. It's a really weird name, but this is the guy that allows you to configure that. And then you can do a host, and then do a config, and then you can do a config.add.json file, I believe is the name of the method, and then you can tell it to look for ocelot.json. And I think if I've done everything correctly, This is all you need at this point. And then obviously you got to go in your startup, and then you still need to wire the Ocelot services here, and you also need to wire up the Ocelot middleware. So let's go ahead and do a few imports. So I'm going to do ocelot.middleware, and then I'm going to do using ocelot.dependency injection in here. It's kind of hard when you don't have Visual Studio, but I'm pretty sure that those are the two you need. And then in here, I'm going to do services.add Ocelot, and I'm also going to pass it the configuration because that's where it reads the JSON file information from. And I'm going to do app.use Ocelot here. And then this is an async method. I already know of that, so I'm just going to make that an async, and then let's just prefix that with async. And I think that's pretty much all you need to get everything set up. Okay, so far, let's recap what we've done. We've created the catalog API on port 7001, and we've created a currencies controller that essentially gives us a list of currencies. We've also created an orders API, port 7002, created an orders controller, and that gives us a bunch of orders. And we went ahead and created the gateway API, which is pretty much an empty web API project, but we also added Ocelot as a NuGet package to it, as you can see here. We also added an empty ocelot.json file, which is going to be the configuration for Ocelot. And then we added references to that JSON file so that our system knows to read that JSON file. And we also added Ocelot as a middleware, and we also added Ocelot services in there. So let's just go ahead and do a .NET build real quick on the gateway API to make sure everything's still compiling, and it should. So that's good. Now let's focus on the ocelot.json. This is essentially going to be the configuration for everything Ocelot related. So let's go to the Chrome here, and then let's get into the get started documentation. Their documentation is pretty spot on. I really like it. Literally at the most base level, this is what you need. You need to have a bunch of rerouting information that tells you where to drive the requests when they come in to the Ocelot API Gateway, and also the base information for where this Ocelot API Gateway is going to run from. In our case, we had decided this is going to be on port 7000 on localhost, so let's keep that as a base URL, and then let's put in some rerouting information. So if you really think about it, all you need to do is tell Ocelot when to forward requests to the orders API and when to forward requests to the catalog API. Very, very, very straightforward to do. Let's look back at the documentation, and let's go into the routing section here. And you'll notice that they have this JSON in here, which pretty much summarizes how you can reroute this information. So you can add multiple of these routes. As you can see, this is a JSON array. Let me just add one, and then we can talk further. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm saying anytime a request comes to port 7000, I know that that's going to be catalog API. So let's just play around and say anytime something comes from HTTP port 7000, and if it goes to api.currencies, I just want that to go up. I want to do API catalog, and then I want to do currencies. So essentially, let me also remove these HTTP methods because we want to address all sorts of HTTP methods. But you could potentially just do a get if you wanted to. You can eliminate certain methods that you don't like. All I'm saying here is that anytime something comes to a catalog API/currencies, it needs to internally direct it to HTTP localhost 7000/API/currencies. And it should be 7001, actually. So let's try this out. So if I go ahead and, let me go to this terminal here because I think it will be much easier. So I'm going to do a cd catalog API. Oops, I'm going to go up one level. And then we're going to do a .NET run to make this guy run on port 7001. as you can see. And then let's go back in here and make sure that this is still working. So yep, that seems to be working. I'm going to close this guy out for the time being. And now all I need to do is open another tab, and then let's go up one level and go Gateway API. And let's now run the Gateway API. And that's going to run on port 7000. Now if everything went right, I should be able to do a 7000, and then I should be able to do a catalog dash API and then currencies, and then that should give me my currency. So this is great. Anytime someone comes with this prefix of catalog API, if you look at the configuration, it already knows that it needs to go into that currencies call. Anytime someone comes with that, it needs to just go in internally to this particular location. But if you kept on doing it this way, then you would have to write one for each and every API call, and that may be the case. But if not, Ocelot allows you to create catch-all variables. So you could literally define a catch-all variable name. Now this is not a reserved word. You could use foo for all you care. I just like to call it catch-all so that someone understands that. And essentially what I'm saying is the same variable name matches here. So what I'm saying is anytime someone prefixes anything on Ocelot 7000 with a prefix of catalog API, anything that follows that will internally be directed to HTTP localhost 7000 / API / whatever that prefix was. And if it resolves that, great. If it can't for whatever reason, then it will just deal with it and give you a bad request or something like that. So let's do that now. So I'm going to shut down. I'm going to keep the catalog API on because we haven't done anything. Let me just do a .NET build for the gateway API again, and then now do .NET run. In this case now, everything should just work fine, and then I should still be able to do catalog API and currencies in here. But if I did like currency, for example, obviously it would say not found. So that's really great. I've been able to do that. Now let's quickly do the configuration for the orders API. So I'm just going to copy this block, and we're going to create a catch-all again, but this time we're going to do a port 7002 because that's where the orders API sits. And this one is just going to change to orders API. And that's literally all you need. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to break this out. I am going to go up one level, orders API, and then I'm going to do a .NET run on the orders API just to make sure that that's working. So let's go in here and do a port 7002 / API orders. Let's make sure that that is running. Let's create another tab here, and then we'll do gateway API, and then let's also do a .NET run, .NET build here to build our latest configuration, and then do a .NET run. Okay, so now if you were to go to localhost 7000, obviously you wouldn't get anything from there because there's no pages or controllers available. So you could create a welcome page or something like that here if you wanted to. But if I go to catalog API / currencies, I'll still be able to go there. If I go to orders API / orders, now I can see the orders API indexed with this. So this is great. This is exactly what we wanted. You could now essentially host these on Docker, and then you could point all your files to the corresponding, or the JSON to the corresponding location in Docker, and then you could just simply expose that base URL, make sure that no one can have access to these internal URLs, and then unify your APIs.